In the summer of 2003, a 1-year-old woman from a small town in Nebraska set off on what was meant to be the adventure of her life. She planned to spend a month traveling through the national parks of the western United States, photographing the wilderness and enjoying the freedom that came with youth and the open road. She never came home. For 10 long years, her family lived in uncertainty, not knowing whether their daughter, sister, and friend was still alive. When the truth finally surfaced in 2013, it was so horrifying that it shook not only the victim's family but also the entire U.S. National Park system. It exposed dangerous security gaps that allowed a predator in a ranger's uniform to hunt vulnerable women for years without consequence. Lauren Bishop grew up in Grand Island, a city of about 50,000 people in the heart of Nebraska. She was the middle of 3 children in a warm, supportive family. Her father was a teacher, her mother a nurse. Lauren was a good student, active in volleyball, and passionate about photography. After graduating high school in 2001, she enrolled at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln, majoring in biology. She dreamed of becoming a wildlife researcher or a nature photographer. Friends and family described her as full of life, independent, a little naive, but driven by a powerful sense of adventure. In the summer of 2003, after finishing her second year of college, Lauren decided to finally make her long-held dream a reality, a journey through the national parks of the American West. She didn't have much money. Student loans and her part-time job as a waitress at a local cafe left little room for a big budget, so she planned to travel cheaply, hitchhiking, sleeping in a tent at public campgrounds, and living on canned food and pasta. Her parents were worried, especially her mother, who begged her to at least travel with someone and not go alone. But Lauren was confident. She had read stories of other young people hitchhiking across the country and believed that everything would be fine if she was careful, chose her rides wisely, and trusted her instincts. On the 25th of June, 2003, she left Grand Island on a Greyhound bus bound for Denver, Colorado. From there, she planned to hitchhike to Rocky Mountain National Park, then on to Yellowstone, Glacier National Park, and back through South Dakota. It was an ambitious route, designed to take about 4 weeks, with a return by late July so she could make it back in time for the university's summer session. Her parents received the first message from her on June 27, after she arrived in Denver. She wrote that everything was going well, that she had met a group of tourists in a hostel who were also heading to the Rockies, and that she planned to join them. The second message came on June 29, in a brief call from a payphone. In 2003, few students owned cell phones. Lauren didn't have one. She said she had reached the town of Estes Park at the entrance to Rocky Mountain National Park. The weather was perfect, and she planned to spend a few days in the park, exploring trails and photographing the wilderness. That was the last time her family ever heard from her. When Lauren didn't check in by mid-July, her parents began to worry. They called hostels in Denver, where she might have stayed, but no one had seen her. They contacted friends who knew about her trip, but those friends said they had parted ways with her in Estes Park. She had decided to take her own route while they continued north. When Lauren failed to return home on July 20 and didn't call her parents went to the police. The Grand Island Police Department contacted authorities in Colorado, and the investigation began. Lauren's last confirmed location was Estes Park. On the 29th of June, 2003, police interviewed staff at the hostel where she had stayed, as well as owners of local shops and cafes. Several people remembered a young woman matching her description. Average height, slim, shoulder-length blonde hair, usually dressed in hiking clothes, carrying a large backpack and wearing a Canon camera around her neck. An employee at an outdoor gear store recalled that Lauren had bought a gas canister for a camping stove and asked about hiking trails in the park. A crucial lead came from a Shell gas station on the edge of Estes Park, right at the entrance to the national park. Security camera footage from June 29 showed Lauren arriving at the station around 10 a.m. She stepped out of a blue sedan that had brought her there, thanked the driver through the window, slung her backpack over her shoulders, and walked toward the roadside leading into the park. The camera captured her standing at the edge of the road, raising her thumb in the classic hitchhiker's gesture. After just a few minutes, a vehicle pulled over a green Ford Expedition SUV with the emblem of the National Park Service on the door. Lauren approached the car, spoke briefly with the driver, a man wearing a park ranger's uniform, then opened the rear door, loaded her backpack, and climbed into the passenger seat. The SUV drove off toward the park. This was the last recorded image of Lauren Bishop. Police immediately contacted the National Park Service and requested information about which rangers were on duty along that stretch of road that morning. The Park Service provided duty rosters, staff lists, and records of official vehicles. According to the logs, 3 rangers were assigned to the park entrance area on the morning of June 29. None of them had recorded picking up a hitchhiker or having contact with a woman matching Lauren's description. Investigators interviewed all 3 rangers. The first 2 categorically denied seeing or giving a ride to anyone that day. The third ranger, Thomas Graves, a 50-year-old veteran with nearly 25 years of service, also denied meeting the girl. He stated that he had spent the morning patrolling the northern part of the park, checking campgrounds and speaking with tourists about rules and safety, but had not given anyone a ride. His assigned vehicle that day was a green Ford Expedition, which matched the car seen in the gas station footage. Graves insisted this was merely a coincidence, explaining that the park had several identical vehicles. Police ordered a more detailed analysis of the video. Technicians attempted to enhance the image to identify the driver's face or the license plate, but the quality of the 2003-era cameras was insufficient. The driver's face was partially hidden by the brim of his ranger hat and reflections on the windshield. The license plate was visible, but blurred. Experts could only make out the first 2 characters and confirm that it was a Colorado plate insufficient to identify a specific vehicle. Meanwhile, the search on the ground continued. The Park Service launched a massive search and rescue operation. Dozens of rangers, volunteers, and search dogs combed the trails, valleys, and campgrounds of Rocky Mountain National Park. The park is vast, over 1,000 square kilometers of rugged terrain, with elevations ranging from 7,000 to over 13,000 feet. Dense forests, rocky ridgelines, rivers, and alpine lakes. For 2 weeks, teams searched. Hundreds of miles of trails were covered. Hundreds of tourists were questioned. Flyers bearing Lauren's photo were distributed throughout the region. Nothing. No trace of her backpack. No clothing. No body. In mid-August 2003, the search was officially called off. Investigators concluded that Lauren had most likely died somewhere inside the park. She may have fallen from a cliff, become lost and succumbed to hypothermia or dehydration, or fallen victim to a wild animal, a bear, or a mountain lion. Her body was presumed to be in an inaccessible area that searchers could not reach, or carried off by predators. The family was offered condolences. The case was classified as an accident with a presumed fatal outcome. A year later, in 2004, Lauren Bishop was officially declared dead. Her parents never accepted it. The absence of a body. The absence of her belongings. None of it let them rest. For years, her mother traveled to Colorado annually, handing out flyers, speaking to tourists and rangers, begging anyone to recall something, anything that might shed light on her daughter's fate. But the years passed, and hope slowly faded. Lauren Bishop's story became just one of many tragedies tied to national parks, where dozens of people disappear or die in the wilderness each year. That changed in the summer of 2013, 10 years after Lauren vanished. On July 23, a young woman, a tourist from California visiting Rocky Mountain National Park, filed an official complaint with park administration and local police. She reported that while hiking on one of the trails, she had been stopped by a park ranger, a middle-aged man, who told her she needed to show her ID and camping permit. After she handed over her documents, the ranger said there was a problem, that she needed to fill out a form, and that for this, she would have to go with him to his service cabin, which he claimed was nearby. The 6-year-old felt that something was wrong. The ranger was acting strangely too intrusive, staring at her in an unsettling way, but she didn't want to cause trouble and agreed to go with him. The cabin was remote, far from the main roads, in a heavily wooded area. Inside, the ranger closed the door, asked her to sit down, and began asking personal questions. Was she traveling alone? Where was she staying? Did anyone know where she was right now? Then he moved closer, placed his hand on her shoulder, and said, "You're very beautiful." The woman panicked. She jumped up and tried to leave, but the ranger stepped between her and the door and told her not to rush. They could have a nice time together. She began to scream and threatened to call the police. The ranger shoved her, and she fell. In that moment, she grabbed a heavy object from the table, a paperweight, and hurled it at his face. He staggered back, clutching his head. She bolted out of the cabin and ran through the forest until she reached the main road, where she flagged down a passing car with tourists inside. She reported the incident immediately. Park authorities launched an internal investigation. The ranger, the woman described whom she identified from a photo in the employee database, was named Thomas Graves. The same Thomas Graves who had been questioned 10 years earlier in connection with the disappearance of Lauren Bishop. Graves was immediately suspended from duty and summoned for questioning. He categorically denied the allegations, claiming the woman had made everything up. He said she had behaved provocatively and that he had done nothing but perform his job. But when investigators began digging deeper, a disturbing pattern emerged. In the Park Service archives, they found several earlier complaints from female tourists about Graves dating back to 2005 and again in 2011. In each case, women reported inappropriate behavior, unwanted touching, and overly personal questions. Every time, the complaints had been dismissed as misunderstandings, cultural differences, or exaggerations. Graves was considered a valuable employee with decades of experience. His colleagues and supervisors could not believe he was capable of anything truly serious. This time, it was different. The California woman's report was detailed, coherent, and she insisted on a formal criminal investigation. The Larimer County Sheriff's Office, which has jurisdiction over Rocky Mountain National Park, took over the case. Detectives decided to search Graves's service residence inside the park and his private home in Loveland, about 30 kilometers away. The search of his park housing revealed nothing unusual, standard furnishings, work documents, nothing suspicious. But the search of Graves's private home was another matter. The house was small, single-story, located in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Loveland. Graves lived alone. He was divorced. His ex-wife and children lived in another state. Neighbors described him as quiet and reserved, someone who kept to himself. At first glance, the house seemed ordinary. Living room, kitchen, bedroom, bathroom neat, slightly old-fashioned. But in the basement, one detective noticed something strange. The basement had concrete walls and floors and was used for storage boxes of old belongings, tools, gardening equipment. When the detective knocked on one section of the wall, it sounded dull and hollow. He took a closer look and noticed faint seams hidden beneath layers of paint and plaster. It was a false wall. Using crowbars and hammers, the detectives broke through part of it and discovered a hidden room behind it, roughly 3. Inside the hidden room stood a metal bed, bolted to the concrete floor. Along the walls were heavy mounts, steel rings embedded directly into the cement. On the ground were boxes filled with canned food, water bottles, and empty buckets. And in the corner, covered by an old tarp, lay something that made even seasoned detectives recoil. Beneath the tarp was a body mummified, dried out, but unmistakably human. A woman's body, judging by the clothing and anatomy. She lay on her side, Her arms and legs twisted unnaturally. A chain was fastened to her wrist, its other end anchored to a ring in the wall. The clothes faded jeans, a t-shirt. Athletic shoes were unmistakably from the early 2000s. The scene was immediately sealed off. Crime scene technicians, medical examiners, and FBI agents were called in. The remains were carefully removed and transported to the morgue. The hidden room was examined inch by inch. Investigators collected every possible trace: DNA samples, fingerprints, hair, food remnants, anything that might reveal what had happened there. The medical examiner conducted a preliminary analysis. The body had undergone natural mummification, a process that occurs in dry environments with low humidity. Colorado's climate and the conditions of the basement were ideal for it. Soft tissue had dried out, but skin and bones remained intact. Based on bone structure and dental records, the examiner concluded that the victim was a young woman, approximately 20 to 25 years old. Marks on her wrists and ankles showed prolonged restraint in a confined position. The exact cause of death was difficult to determine, but early findings suggested suffocation or extreme exhaustion. The most critical task was identification. DNA was extracted from bone marrow and teeth and sent to a laboratory. At the same time, investigators cataloged the personal items found in the room. Among the cans and bottles were objects that clearly belonged to the victim: a faded North Face backpack, a Canon camera from the early 2000s with undeveloped film inside, and a wallet containing a Nebraska driver's license. When a detective opened the wallet and saw the photo, his heart sank. A young woman smiled back at him. Name: Lauren Michelle Bishop. Date of birth: the 15th of March, 1982. Address: Grand Island, Nebraska. The girl who had vanished in Rocky Mountain National Park 10 years earlier. Days later, DNA confirmed it. The body found in Thomas Graves's basement was Lauren Bishop. She had not died in an accident in the mountains. She had been abducted, imprisoned, and had died chained to a wall in that hidden room several meters underground, while her family and authorities searched for her in the wilderness. Thomas Graves was arrested the same day the body was discovered. He was charged with kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, and first-degree murder. He refused to speak, stating he would only do so in the presence of an attorney. The court-appointed lawyer attempted to construct a defense, but the evidence was overwhelming. Investigators reconstructed the crime. On the 29th of June, 2003, Thomas Graves was on duty at the park entrance. He saw Lauren Bishop hitchhiking by the roadside. Whether he watched her for a while or acted on impulse, no one knows. But he stopped, introduced himself as a park ranger, and offered her a ride. Lauren trusted the uniform. Instead of taking her to a trailhead or campground, Graves claimed he needed to check her documents or give her safety information, and drove her to a remote service building in the park. There, in isolation, he attacked her, bound her, and later transported her to his private home in Loveland, into the hidden basement cell he had prepared in advance. Lauren was held there for an unknown period. Based on the condition of her body and the supplies in the room, forensic experts concluded that she may have survived there for weeks, possibly months. There was enough water and canned food to stay alive, but the conditions were inhuman. No daylight, minimal ventilation, a chain that severely limited her movement. Examination of the bones revealed signs of extreme emaciation, pointing to prolonged malnutrition and severe stress. The cause of death was determined to be a combination of factors: extreme wasting, dehydration, and most likely suffocation. Experts concluded that Graves may have eventually stopped giving her food and water and allowed her to die, or that she suffocated due to physical violence or the conditions inside the room. The exact time of death could not be established because of the mummification, but all evidence suggested that Lauren died in late 2003 or early 2004, only a few months after her abduction. Investigators also sought to determine whether Lauren had been Graves's only victim. Detectives searched his home, his vehicles, his work records, and his computer. What they found was deeply disturbing. Hundreds of photographs of young women tourists in the park, taken secretly from a distance or with a zoom lens. Graves appeared to select potential victims, observe them, and photograph them. However, no direct evidence was found that he had abducted anyone else. The hidden room in the basement contained only Lauren's belongings. Either she was his first and only victim, or he had been careful enough to leave no trace of other crimes. Earlier complaints from female tourists found in Park Service archives pointed to a clear pattern. Graves used his position as a ranger, the authority of his uniform, and the isolation of the park to approach vulnerable women, especially those traveling alone. In most cases, he had been stopped by resistance or by the presence of other people. In Lauren's case, every factor aligned in his favor. She was alone, trusting, far from home, and no one knew exactly where she was. The case of Thomas Graves went before the Larimer County District Court in early 2014. Prosecutors sought the maximum sentence, life in prison, without the possibility of parole. The defense attempted to have Graves declared legally insane or to negotiate a plea deal in exchange for a lesser sentence. The prosecution rejected all such offers. The case was too severe, the victim too young, the circumstances too horrific. The trial began in April 2015 and lasted 3 weeks. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence. Surveillance footage from a gas station showing Lauren getting into a Park Service vehicle. Duty records proving that Graves was on shift that day and failed to report picking up a hitchhiker. Graves's DNA found on the chain and inside the hidden room. Lauren's personal belongings recovered from his home. Testimony from the medical examiner about the cause of death and the conditions of her captivity. Statements from other women who had been harassed by Graves. One of the most emotional moments of the trial came when Lauren's parents took the stand. Her mother, broken by years of uncertainty and by the horrific truth of what had happened to her daughter, spoke about the girl they had lost. She described years of hope and despair, and how they had trusted a system meant to protect visitors, only to learn that it had allowed a predator in a ranger's uniform to operate freely. Her father, in tears, recalled the last conversation with his daughter, when she had called from Denver, full of excitement and plans. He told the court that they could never have imagined such a fate awaiting her. The defense attempted to raise doubt, arguing that the evidence was circumstantial, that the video did not clearly show the driver's face, that Lauren could have been abducted by someone else, and that her belongings might somehow have ended up in Graves's house by other means. But the arguments were weak. DNA does not lie. Duty records do not lie. A hidden prison built into a basement does not appear by accident. Graves himself did not testify. He sat at the defense table, emotionless, almost vacant, avoiding the eyes of Lauren's parents and refusing to look at the photographs of their daughter displayed in the courtroom. Defense psychiatrists attempted to portray him as mentally ill and incapable of fully controlling his actions. But the prosecution presented clear evidence of planning. Graves had built the secret room in advance. He had stockpiled supplies. He had concealed his actions carefully for years. All of it demonstrated awareness, intent, and premeditation. On the 23rd of May 2015, after 2 days of deliberation, the jury delivered its verdict. Guilty on all counts: kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, and first-degree murder with aggravating circumstances. The judge, a woman in her 60s with decades of experience on the bench, sentenced Thomas Graves to life in prison without the possibility of parole in a maximum security facility in the state of Colorado. Thomas Graves will spend the rest of his life behind bars, with no hope of freedom. When the verdict was read, quiet sobs filled the courtroom. Lauren's mother wrapped her arms around her husband, and they both wept. These were not only tears of grief, but also of relief. Justice had finally been served. Their daughter's killer would be held accountable. After the trial, an investigation began into how Graves had managed to go undetected for so long. The National Park Service launched an internal review that exposed serious systemic failures. Complaints about Graves, filed over many years, had not been properly investigated. His supervisors either ignored them or conducted superficial reviews and accepted his explanations at face value. There was no system in place to monitor the behavior of employees, especially those working alone in remote areas. Duty logs were kept only as a formality. Rangers were not required to report every action or every interaction with visitors, allowing people like Graves to operate with almost no oversight. Park vehicles were not equipped with GPS trackers or cameras, making it impossible to detect actions such as picking up a hitchhiker or driving to an unauthorized location. In response, the National Park Service implemented sweeping reforms, mandatory background checks and psychological evaluations for all employees, especially those in law enforcement roles. A system requiring detailed reporting of any visitor contact beyond routine interactions. GPS tracking and video recording equipment in all service vehicles. Regular independent audits to ensure compliance with protocols. A confidential hotline for visitors to report inappropriate behavior by park staff, with a guarantee that every complaint would be fully investigated. These measures came too late for Lauren, but they were meant to ensure that a tragedy like hers would never happen again. For Lauren's family, healing was long and painful. At last, they were able to lay their daughter to rest, though in a condition that was heartbreaking to accept. Her funeral took place in Grand Island, in a small, private ceremony attended by relatives, friends, and former classmates. Lauren was buried in the local cemetery beneath a simple headstone bearing her name, her dates, and a short inscription, "Beloved daughter and sister. A free spirit. Taken from us far too soon." Her parents founded the Lauren Bishop Foundation, dedicated to educating young people, especially women, about safety while traveling alone. The foundation also advocates for stricter laws and oversight of law enforcement officers in national parks and other public spaces to prevent abuse of power. Thomas Graves is serving his sentence at the Colorado State Penitentiary in Canyon City. For his own safety, he is held in solitary confinement for 23 hours a day. Other inmates, after learning of his crimes, have repeatedly threatened him. He refuses interviews and shows no remorse. His ex-wife and children have cut all ties with him and changed their last names to avoid any association with his. Lauren Bishop's story is both a warning and a lesson. It reminds us that danger does not come only from strangers in dark alleys. It can also come from those who wear uniforms and swear to protect and serve. It shows that systems designed to keep people safe can fail without constant oversight, transparency, and accountability. Every year on the anniversary of Lauren's disappearance, her family and friends organize a memorial hike in Rocky Mountain National Park along one of the trails she planned to explore. They carry her photograph, share stories about her, remember her laughter, her love for nature, and her dreams. And they hope that her story, tragic and horrifying as it is, will help protect others by reminding them that even in the most beautiful places, darkness can hide.